Hi everyone, Nick DeCourcy here with Bright Ideas Agency. In this video I'm going to be looking at connecting Power Automate with third-party apps and services outside of Microsoft 365. And if you're not that familiar with the Power Platform, you could be forgiven for thinking that Power Platform is just about connecting together Microsoft 365 elements or other parts of the Microsoft ecosystem, because so many examples that you see are tied into connecting to those apps. But that actually couldn't be further from the truth. There are lots of ways to connect Power Platform, Power Automate, Power Apps to services and data that sits outside of Microsoft. The most important of which is a whole range of connectors. There are hundreds of connectors for Power Automate, and many of them connect into third-party apps. But there's also other solutions like custom connectors and Power Automate Desktop that can help you in situations where a connector doesn't already exist. In this video, I'm going to be focusing on those third-party connectors that do already exist and give it a few examples of how you can add value to your processes by connecting third-party apps that you may already use into the Power Platform and into Microsoft 365. And the first example I'm going to look at is to do with email marketing and looking at the Mailchimp connector. I'm then going to look at some social elements and look at the YouTube connector. And finally, an example that revolves around if your CRM solution is outside of Microsoft, I'm going to look at the Salesforce connector. In this first example, we're going to look at a situation where you might be using Microsoft Forms to capture survey results. And then you want to take the information that you get from those surveys, the contact information of your customers or whoever you sent those surveys to, and populate that information directly into Mailchimp. So if we just take a look at the flows that are associated with Demo 1, we have this flow that's turned on right now, which takes our Forms survey to Mailchimp. So I've got a simple Forms survey, just with one question: rate the service you received on your last visit, and capturing an email address, and then some other contact information and an explicit OK for us to send whoever fills out the form emails. So if we just jump into our flow, you can see that the way this works is that the flow is triggered when we get a new response from our form. We get the details of our response using the response ID. We then have a simple compose action that takes a look at the email address and makes sure that it looks like an email address. So what this is doing here is just taking that email and making sure that we have an @ sign somewhere in the middle of it, and that there's a dot in the second part of the email address, so that it looks like something at something.com. Then we have a condition. So we check that number one, it looks like an email address, so that compose actually outputs as true. And secondly, do we have an affirmative response to can we email you? And if we do, then we add that user into Mailchimp. So this is just one Mailchimp action, add member to list. If we just come over here and we put in Mailchimp, we take a look at what else you can do there. You can see that there's a whole bunch of different actions that you've got to do with Mailchimp. So there's actually pretty rich interactions that you can have between Mailchimp and Power Automate. But in this case, we just want to add a member into the list. So we take the information that we just got from our survey above. And then the last thing that we have to do is deal with the situation where a member might already exist. Because for our purposes, our objective with this flow is simply to make sure that the user who's filled out the survey is attached to our mailing list. So if they're already there, then that is a success from the point of view of this flow, even though from the point of view of the action add member to list, that is a failure. So we have an on fail condition here. So we've configured run after to say we only run the terminate gracefully if member already exists condition if this step above has failed. And in that case, if the reason for the failure is because the error, which is held under the body in an item called title, is member exists, then we terminate with a success. And if no, if there's some other error, then we terminate as failed and we pass the error code and the description of that error back to Power Automate to display with that failure. So that's very straightforward, and let me just jump over to another user and I'm going to fill out this survey form. You can see Pradeep demo at dev.brightideas.agency is the address that I'm filling this out with. So I'm going to rate my service as a 3 and I'm going to submit my form. We'll jump back to Henrietta. We'll look back at our flow. You can see that 10 seconds ago we ran this flow. We've got our new response, our response details. You can see all the different items that we get as the response details. We validated our email as true, and we added our member into the list. And if we jump over to Mailchimp, just let's refresh our contact list. And you can see that we now have Pradeep demo at dev.brightideas.agency as a member of this list, with a source being Microsoft Power Platform. So that works really well, but there are lots of situations where this may not be the flow that you need. I've worked in a lot of organizations where actually the workflow of getting contacts that different people around the company have acquired into the mailing list has been a little bit of a cumbersome process, because you don't always want everyone who's going out and collecting information from people or running surveys and so on and so forth to have access into the email marketing platform. So I've worked in places where there have been lots of different ways of doing this, and sometimes quite cumbersome processes. The one that I can think of that was the most cumbersome was we actually had someone who sat there with the web sign-up form for the mailing list and just went through a physical list of the people that we had collected and put them into the mailing list. So that took quite a lot of time. So in a situation where you do want these things broken down in that way, how can we approach that? So let's just jump back into my flows. And you can see that I've created 2 additional flows here. I'm just going to go ahead and turn this one off. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to turn these ones on. And what I've done here is broken down the flow so that the interaction inside the company in relation to the contacts and the interaction with Mailchimp are 2 separate workflows. So let me just show you what I mean. So if I jump over to Teams, I've got this team here, which is my online marketing team, and I've created a Microsoft list in my team, which has got some information here for people who need to be added into Mailchimp. You can see I've got an email address, I've got some other contact information, I check whether I have explicit consent, I have a source, and I have a check mark to say whether these people have been added into Mailchimp. And I can give anyone in my organization access to this list. And if I set up my flows correctly, I can then populate Mailchimp from this list without giving anyone else access to do that directly from my forms or from their individual forms. So let's just take a look at what this looks like. So I've got my form survey 2 lists. Let's just go in and edit this so we can see how this works. So it's exactly the same start. When a new response is submitted to my form, I get the response details, I validate the email address, but then instead of putting my contact into my Mailchimp list, I add them into my Microsoft list. And remember, Microsoft lists is a SharePoint list. So I'm using the SharePoint connector here, the connector that you would use to interact with a Microsoft list is the SharePoint connector. For those who are not that familiar with this, that's going to be a little bit confusing, but just remember SharePoint connector, Microsoft lists, that's how you can interact with them. I then have a part 2 to this. So if I go back to my flows, I then have lists to Mailchimp. So if I edit this, so an item is created in my list, I get that item, I validate the email, and then if I have a valid email and I have explicit consent to put that email into my mailing list, then I add the member into my mailing list. So this is essentially the same as the first flow that we looked at. But there is a little bit of an extra complication here, because we still want a situation where, irrespective of whether this succeeds in that we add in a new contact into our mailing list, or it fails because there is that member already in our mailing list, we still want to go ahead and update our item in Teams to be able to say, yeah, we've added them into Mailchimp. Because the objective here is to check they're added into Mailchimp. It doesn't really matter whether we're doing it on this flow or whether they're there already. So this makes this slightly more complicated, and I could have approached this by using a scope. Remember, a scope is an action where we want everything within that box to happen before we say, okay, that's done, or no, it failed. It either succeeds or it fails as a bunch of actions. But in this case, I've not used a scope. I've used simply run after conditions and branching. So I have a situation here where if this fails, this add member to list, I come down this route of if a member fails because the member already exists, still update the record. So this is a condition. I have the condition exactly the same as I did last time, saying if the title is member exists, then I'm going to go down the yes path. And if I go down the yes path, I'm going to come down here and update the item. And if I go down the no path because it failed for some other reason, then I'm going to terminate as failed. So the big change here is I don't have a success termination here, whereas I did last time, because I don't want to terminate. I want to jump down to this update item action down here. So then you're thinking, well, what's the other branch? Well, we do have a situation where this add member to list will succeed because we've added a member to a list. So we still need to update the item down here, and we need some route to get there, because remember, this condition is only going to run if this has failed. We need to get down to this update action even if this succeeds. So in that case, we go down this branch, which follows if it succeeds and comes down to the update item. But a strange little thing with this is, with the branching, one of these items is always going to be run and one of these items is always going to be skipped. So this item down here, the update item action, actually needs a run after condition for each of the branches above, or of if it succeeded or if it's skipped. Because if one of these fails, then the only situation where one fails is we're going to terminate here. So both of these are either going to run successfully or be skipped under every condition. So we need update item to run whether it has been successful or whether it has been skipped. And you can see that here, that we update the item. So that splitting of this workflow means that what we can do is we can then take our first workflow, lists, form survey to lists, and we can share it. We can share that with anyone, and we can say, if you're someone who pushes out a form survey and you want to capture people to put into our mailing list, here's a flow that you can use to accomplish this. We're going to need to make sure that each of those users has access to the Microsoft list that we've created in our team. So the best way of doing that would be to make them members of your team. But beyond that, we can go right ahead and we can share out that flow. So let's just do that. So the way that you're probably most accustomed to sharing flows is just coming up here and saying share. And in this particular situation, we don't want to do that because we don't want the end user using our connections in order to run this flow. We want them using their own connections because they're going to be using their own form and they're going to be using their own access into SharePoint. So the other way that you can do this is you can send a copy. And you can send you get the name of the flow, we can put a description. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to send this to Megan, who is going to set up a form for us. So let's send that across, and then we'll jump across to Megan. Okay, so we've now jumped over to Megan's account. And first of all, you have to make sure that you're in Power Automate in the same environment that you were working on in the previous example. Because if we come over to templates and we hit this ellipsis and say shared with me, you can see the shared template that Henrietta has just sent us. So we just click in here. You can see the template. This flow lets you add people into the mailing list. We're going to connect to our connections. And we're going to connect SharePoint and Forms. And you can see this looks a little bit different here. And the reason for that is that Megan's account does not have access to the form that we were using in Henrietta's account, because remember, we didn't share those connections. So you can see that I have a form already set up in Megan's account, just a very simple demo form that we're going to use. So I'm going to jump back over here and I'm going to get rid of Henrietta's form and I'm going to pick Megan's demo survey, and I'm going to do the same here. So I'm just going to jump into this compose action and just make an edit here, because this this content where I pull out the email address is going to be unique to each form that I use. So because I've updated the form, I need to update the content. So I can just delete this from the expression, come in here, grab my email address, update it, and that's properly updated. I'm going to do exactly the same with this response here. Can we email you? And I'm going to come down, eliminate all of this. The title is actually the email address, and I'm going to say this is Megan's form. So jumping into another window, I have Megan's demo survey up. I'm just going to submit a response with this test email address. And jumping back into Megan's, you can see that the flow that we just created succeeded. So now, jumping back into Henrietta's account, you can see the list that we have in our online marketing team has a new entry with test email at dev.brightideas.agency, which is the email address that we just submitted from Megan's form here. And if we jump back over to our flows, so we have our lists to Mailchimp, and jumping back over to the flow history, you can see that our flow has just run successfully here. And jumping back over to our list, you can see that this has been added into Mailchimp. So you could distribute a flow like that anywhere in your organization. And if you split things up in this way, it gives you the ability to have complete control over your process while making your process very flexible for other people within your organization, and hopefully get away from cumbersome processes that are involved in getting people onto mailing lists. So let's just jump back into these flows in Henrietta's account, and my second demonstration is to do with YouTube. So what have we got here? So we have a YouTube connector which allows you to look at videos that match a search and videos that you post. So let's just jump out of this. I'm just going to quickly create an automated flow. I'm just going to look at YouTube and look at the options here. So there are three options when I upload a video. So for example, you may want to promote your own video uploads within your organization. When a video is uploaded by a channel, so if there's a channel that you want to follow, for example, for some training purposes for a product that you use within your organization, you may want to use that. Or when a new video matches a search. So if you do a search in YouTube and it matches, we're going to update that search and we can do something with that data. So let's just jump back into my flow again. We're going to edit this flow. And you can see in this case, I've created a flow when a new video matches a search. So my query is Power Automate, and what I've decided to do is when a video matches that search, I am going to post about it in Teams. So I've created a channel in online marketing called YouTube Tracker, and when a video matches that search, it's going to post a message that says new video with the video's title, the description of the video, and the link to that video. So let's just jump over to Teams and see what that looks like. So I've got my YouTube Tracker channel here, and you can see that through the day I've been adding in videos about Power Automate, and hopefully when I publish this one, this will be added to this list as well. And so this is a good way of being able to conglomerate different things that are going on in different social networks. There are connections into several social networks from Power Automate, and for your marketing team or for training or for other purposes, this may be something that is useful to you to use. Now, the last example that I've got here is to do with Salesforce. So Salesforce, I'll just jump into my demo Salesforce area. So Salesforce is another CRM system, very similar to Dynamics 365. I believe it's a bit more popular than Dynamics 365, so you may be more likely to be using it, but with very similar capabilities. And in Power Automate, if we just create an automated flow and we look for Salesforce, you can see that there are two triggers with Salesforce. And because Salesforce is very similar to Dynamics in terms of what it's doing, the way as it works in terms of the connector is very similar to what you can do with the Dataverse connector in Power Automate. So really you've got two very broad triggers of when a record is modified or when a record is created. So what does this look like? So if I edit this flow, I've got when an object is created, and then I can just choose what the object type is. And your groups of object types in Salesforce is very similar to your entities or your tables in Dataverse. So in this case, I've chosen leads, but it could be an account, it could be various other things. So when an object is created in leads, you can do an OData filter if you wish to. So this looks very similar to the Dataverse connector. And in this case, I've said alert my general channel in Teams in my online marketing team, just saying there's a new lead in Salesforce with a first name, last name, and company name. So let's just jump over to Salesforce, and I'm going to create myself in here. So I'm going to say new, let's say Mr. Nick DeCourcy from Bright Ideas Agency, and put my email address in as nick@brightideasagency.com, and I'm just going to save that. And I've got my new lead created in Salesforce, and I can do whatever I want to do with it over here. So back over in Teams, eventually I'm going to see this pop up in here. So why would you want to do this? Well, you may have some departments in your company that are using Salesforce or a different CRM package, and others that are relying upon Microsoft 365 more. So there may be use cases where you want to interact with that data, and really anything that you can think about that you might want to interact with from the point of view of Dynamics, you can do something similar with Salesforce. And if we just quickly jump into this flow, let's just add a step here and see what we can do back in Salesforce in terms of actions. So there's a huge number of actions here. I can create records, I can delete records, I can get the object types that exist, I can upload information, I can update records. So I have a complete capability to make an action in Power Automate when something changes in Salesforce, and a total capability to make an update in Salesforce when something changes in Power Automate or with data somewhere else. So having the capability of moving seamlessly between Teams and Salesforce, or SharePoint and Salesforce, or even the examples that we just had like Forms and Mailchimp and so on and so forth with Salesforce through Power Automate is completely possible. And it doesn't only stop with Salesforce. There are connectors, I know, for HubSpot. I believe there's one for Act. So a number of different CRM packages are available with Power Automate, and a lot of CRM packages will also have an API if you want to build something custom there. So let's just jump back over to our general channel, and you can see that by now Henrietta has updated the group to say that Nick DeCourcy from Bright Ideas Agency is a new lead in Salesforce. So there we go. That's a very quick rundown of 3 examples of using third-party connectors in Power Automate. And my intention is over the next weeks to months to also explore the other options for working with third-party apps in Power Automate. That is using custom connectors, using other SaaS services that do similar jobs to Power Automate to be an intermediary, and lastly using Power Automate Desktop to interact with apps that don't have an API. They're not designed to be online and connect to other data in that way. But hopefully what this video has done has inspired you around the idea that Power Automate does not lock you into Microsoft's ecosystem. It isn't simply for people who only use Microsoft 365. And what you should be aiming for within your organization is to, where possible, link together the edges that you have within your processes between different systems to minimize friction, to maximize automation, because that's going to add to productivity. It's going to make your employees happier with the processes that they're engaged in because they're doing less busy work around those processes. And it's going to add to better quality of your data and ultimately a better experience both for your customers and your employees. If this is something that you're interested in and you need help with it, then please do reach out. This is exactly what Bright Ideas Agency gets involved in. Digital transformation projects specifically around Microsoft 365, but also looking at other technologies with an understanding that most organizations don't specifically use Microsoft technologies on their own. If you've enjoyed this video, then please do give it a like. If this is the type of content that you enjoy, then please subscribe to the channel because there will be more of it. And until next time, bye-bye.